Friday evening, a well-known true crime broadcast goes to air with a single word: bombshell. An investigative reporter on that broadcast says a person south of Tucson has been detained for questioning in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Not a confirmation, not an arrest. Movement inside a case that has already produced detentions that went nowhere. Tens of thousands of views on X. A community that has waited 76 days for a suspect hears the word bombshell and leans in. This report references individuals who have been detained and released without being charged. No person referenced in this program has been identified as a suspect by law enforcement. You already know where you were sitting when you heard that word. If you've been following this case the way most of the people watching right now have been following it, you were probably doing something small at the end of a long week. Somebody on your feed posted the clip. It ended with an exclamation point and the word bombshell. And you stopped what you were doing. Because for 76 days, there has not been a bombshell. There has been a masked man on a doorbell camera. There have been ransom notes in cryptocurrency. There have been photographs of a gray Range Rover being towed from a Culver's parking lot. There have been news conferences where a sheriff stands at a podium and says nothing that sounds like an arrest. And there has been an 84-year-old woman missing since the first day of February, whose daughter has been pleading on national television for the return of her mother. So on a Friday evening in April, when Crime Stories with Nancy Grace went to air, an investigative reporter, Dave Mack, began talking about a person south of Tucson detained for questioning in the Nancy Guthrie case. The community leaned forward, because the geography was familiar. Greater than asterisk. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the same general area where someone was detained before several weeks ago? Asterisk. South of Tucson is where the Rio Rico detention unfolded in February. South of Tucson is where a man named Carlos Palazuelos was pulled over, taken in, questioned for hours, and released without charges. Greater than asterisk, a complete shock, asterisk. Greater than asterisk, it was. So what are you going to do now, asterisk. Greater than asterisk, I tried to clear my name. I didn't do anything. Days later, a separate operation unfolded much closer to Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills. Not south of Tucson, near her, a SWAT team. Forensic vehicles. A gray Range Rover towed from a nearby Culver's restaurant where 3 people were detained. When the smoke cleared, no one had been charged in connection with the Guthrie case at all. So when Dave Mack said south of Tucson on a Friday evening in April, he was not naming a random direction on a map. He was pointing back to a region the investigation had already searched once, without producing a named suspect. He framed it on air in the language of a tip that had reached the broadcast, rather than a confirmed arrest from the sheriff's office. Greater than asterisk. It appears that we're right back in that same general area as we had been before. And now we're being led to the trough. You know, a possible suspect. Asterisk. He did not name the detained person. He did not identify the agency that made the detention. He did not produce a booking photo or a court docket. What he produced was the thing this community has been waiting for longer than it likes to admit. The suggestion of movement. The suggestion that the pattern the case had fallen into, a long silence from Pima County, the occasional one-line press release, the weekly reminder from the family that no detail is too small, had been broken. And then the broadcast did what broadcasts do. It moved on. Nancy Grace and her panel ran through the other stories on the rundown. The broadcast ended, the internet took over. And that was the atmosphere heading into the second beat of the Friday night, which was the question everybody on the feed had started asking at the same time. Was this the development that had pulled Savannah Guthrie off the air on Wednesday? You remember the Wednesday clip. Savannah Guthrie sat next to Anne Hathaway on the Asterix Today Show set, looked into the camera, and said she had Anne Hathaway right there. Mother Mary herself. She teased the interview. She teased the Devil Wears Prada reunion. And then the Asterix Today Show cut to commercial. When they came back, Savannah was not in the interview chair anymore. Hoda Cope was. Hoda, who had been filling in for co-anchor Craig Melvin during a vacation week, stepped in without explanation. Savannah returned briefly at the end of the broadcast for a short food-related appearance with the rest of the anchors. The show offered no comment. NBC offered no comment. Anne Hathaway offered no comment. The minute and a half in which Savannah Guthrie disappeared became the minute and a half the internet could not stop replaying. The Daily Mail moved first. The paper reported, citing an unnamed NBC insider, that Today had put a 3-word code in place for Savannah. The reporting said that if a development landed in the case during a live broadcast, a producer would quietly approach her and tell her she was needed off set. Not that she had a call, not that she was wanted in the control room. Needed offset. 3 words. And the insider told the Asterix Daily Mail the show would pull her mid-broadcast if it had to. That line, pull her mid-broadcast if we had to, ran through the online conversation for days. A second source, also cited by the Asterix Daily Mail, pulled the temperature down. That source pointed out that hosts tease upcoming portions of a broadcast and hand them off all the time. That Hoda stepping in was not unusual, and that the absence of an explanation did not on its own prove anything. Both explanations landed in the public record by the end of Wednesday. The cautious one, host teases, co-host completes. The dramatic one, producer approaches, host is needed offset, the case has moved. And the case being what it is, and its audience being what it is, the dramatic explanation did not wait for corroboration. It got a head start. So by the time Dave Mack went on air Friday evening, the audience already had the second half of a story ready to snap into place. Savannah had been pulled from the Anne Hathaway interview on Wednesday. Something had happened. A hair sample had moved to the FBI on Thursday, and we will get to that. And now on Friday, somebody had been taken into custody. The line from the Wednesday mid-show disappearance to the Friday detention rumor was the line the internet wanted to draw. And the line got drawn. The problem with the line is that nobody outside Today, Asterix producers, and Savannah's immediate family knew what had actually happened on Wednesday. The reporting that NBC had established a code for her was insider reporting, not court-filed documents. The reporting that she might leave mid-broadcast was a reported capability, not a reported event. No source has confirmed that Wednesday's departure was in fact a code-word departure. The cautious second source told the Asterix Daily Mail the opposite, that nothing unusual had necessarily happened. And Savannah herself has not addressed the moment. What the Friday audience was doing, in other words, was stacking 2 uncertainties on top of each other and treating the stack as a certainty. Wednesday could have been the code. Friday could have been the result. Both things could have been true. Both things could also have been nothing. And that distinction matters in this case more than it has mattered in almost any case of the last 12 months. A family has been begging for information for 78 days. A sheriff's office has been under pressure for 78 days. The difference between a rumor that lasted overnight and an arrest that actually happened is the difference between a family that can breathe and a family that cannot. The day before Dave Mack's broadcast, the case did move. It moved quietly, the way case evidence moves when it is not being announced at a press conference. Sources familiar with the investigation told Fox News Digital and ABC News reported in parallel that DNA evidence recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home, including test results from a hair sample, had been received by the FBI. The sample had been collected weeks earlier. Testing had been in process at a private laboratory in Florida. And then, within the last few days before that Thursday, the results had been shared with the FBI laboratory for further analysis. To understand why that matters, you have to understand the evidence pipeline that has run through this case since the first week of February. When the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI arrived at the Catalina Foothills home the morning of February 1st, the forensic collection was significant and layered. Blood was found on the front porch, later confirmed to be Nancy's. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from the home, appearing similar to the gloves worn by the masked man on the Nest doorbell camera. Fibers, hair, biological samples, all of it went out for testing. The glove produced a profile. That profile did not match anyone in the FBI's combined DNA index system CODIS, and it did not match any other sample recovered inside the home. Subsequent reporting tied the glove profile to a restaurant worker employed nearby, someone with no connection to the case. That line of inquiry resolved. The other DNA samples recovered inside the home have been more complicated. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has described the profile as mixed, containing genetic material from 3 or more individuals. The mixture has posed a challenge for traditional database comparison. Deconvolution software, the tool forensic laboratories use to separate individual contributors from a mixed sample, has limits. When a mixture becomes complex enough, even the most advanced deconvolution cannot produce a single clean profile that can be run against a database. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has said that in her understanding, a mixture of that complexity is not one that can simply be divided up. Which brings us to the hair. The hair is separate from the mixture. It has been described in the reporting as a sample that may undergo a different and more advanced form of forensic analysis. The kind of work the FBI laboratory at Quantico can do with technology the private laboratory in Florida was not designed for. The reporting has used the language the FBI itself uses in other cases: advanced technology, new techniques, methods designed to extract information from samples that older processes would consume or destroy. Whether that reference is to investigative genetic genealogy, to a specific new extraction platform, or to something the Bureau has not publicly named, is not clear from the reporting. What is clear is that the hair sample now sits in the hands of the agency with the broadest toolkit in the United States for working with material like it. There is a tension inside this pipeline. Reporting first published by Reuters, and confirmed by Fox News Digital, described a period of friction between the sheriff's office and the FBI over where the physical evidence in this case should be tested. According to that reporting, the FBI had asked Sheriff Nanos for the evidence, including the glove and the DNA from the home, to be processed at the FBI's National Crime Laboratory in Virginia. The sheriff, according to the reporting, insisted on using the private Florida laboratory instead. One source told Fox News Digital that the FBI would need to retest the evidence anyway, that the Bureau's own method could do the work without destroying the sample, and that in a case like this, time matters. The Sheriff's Department pushed back in a statement posted to X on April 16. The department wrote that it had worked with the FBI since the beginning of the investigation, that the posting was not new information, and that the private Florida laboratory continues to share information with the FBI laboratory and with other partner laboratories across the country. DNA analysis, the statement said, remains ongoing. Both statements can be true. The FBI can have the hair sample. The Bureau and the Sheriff's Office can have had an earlier dispute over which laboratory would touch the rest of the evidence. The Sheriff's Department can be cooperating now, and can also have taken, from the FBI's perspective, longer to get there than the Bureau would have preferred. The hair sample moving to Quantico is not a closure moment. It is, in the language the reporting itself has used, an advanced examination with no guaranteed output. But it is the most substantive forensic development the case has produced in weeks. And it is the quiet headline that sat underneath the Friday bombshell, like a foundation the bombshell was briefly allowed to stand on. On the Friday broadcast of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, Dave Mack spoke about the case in sequence. He addressed the 76-day mark. He addressed the community hearing someone may have been detained. Greater than asterisk, we're being led to the trough, a possible suspect. There's possible new information, but now we're 2 months down the road, and a lot more information has come in. We're getting some DNA evidence back, and now back in the same place. So we'll have to wait and see what happens next. Asterisk. The episode description on the Apple Podcast listing reflects this. Asterisk. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, mother of Savannah Guthrie, missing 76 days. The episode notes the program is also hearing someone may have been detained. That language, hearing someone may have been detained, is the language of a tip passing through a broadcast pipeline, not the language of a confirmed arrest. Mack went further on air. He pointed to the mid-show moment with Savannah on Wednesday, the Anne Hathaway interview she teased and then did not conduct. The handoff to Hoda Kotb, the absence of explanation from the network. He framed it as a development worth reading alongside the rumor. Nancy Grace on the same broadcast connected the two. If the mid-show moment had involved a code word notification to Savannah, the notification would have been for a recovery, an identification, or a death announcement. Savannah came back for the tail end of the broadcast, which Grace suggested told you the notification was not a discovery of her mother, which meant the notification, if there had been one, was something else, possibly a detention. Possibly the detention Dave Mack was now reporting had happened south of Tucson. That is on-air analysis. That is commentary, not corroboration. It connected dots in a way that made narrative sense to the audience. But it did not produce the dots. The dots had to come from law enforcement. And by Friday evening, law enforcement had not produced them. The Pima County Sheriff's Department had not confirmed a detention. The FBI had not confirmed a detention. No court docket had surfaced. No booking photo had been released. The entire structure of the story, as the community consumed it, rested on an unsourced tip on asterisk crime stories and on-air extrapolation from the Wednesday Today Show moment. This is how stories move in the true crime ecosystem in the second half of the 2020s. A known broadcaster says there are reports of a development. The audience, already primed by 10 weeks of waiting, fills in the specifics the broadcaster did not provide. Other accounts amplify. Aggregation sites scrape the social posts and publish blog versions. By the time the original broadcaster has moved on to the next case on the rundown, the claim has grown a second life on platforms the broadcaster does not control. And on this particular Friday, that second life produced exactly the kind of moment that makes this case so instructive. As the rumor spread and the view counts climbed and the comments filled up with the word finally, there was, underneath the rumor, a very specific absence. Nobody had named the detained person. Nobody had identified the agency that made the detention. Nobody had a location, a specific time, or a single on-the-record source in law enforcement. What was circulating was a broadcaster's description of a tip, and a panel's on-air speculation about the link between that tip and an unrelated mid-show television moment from 2 days earlier. Greater than asterisk. If you've been following this case from the beginning, you already know what comes next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the moment it changes. Fox News digital reporter Michael Ruiz went to Sheriff Chris Nanos on Friday. The question was direct. Had a new person of interest been detained overnight in the Nancy Guthrie case? The answer came back one word long: nope. Ruiz published that answer on X, and the rumor, which had been building for hours, collapsed inside a single screenshot. The corroboration arrived from Jennifer Coffindaffer, the retired FBI special agent who has been one of the consistent outside voices on this case. She wrote on X directly that according to Sheriff Nanos, no one was detained the night before in Nancy's case. Yahoo News confirmed it. TV Insider confirmed it. Parade confirmed it. IB Times UK confirmed it. Within 12 hours of the Asterisk Crime Stories broadcast, every major aggregator covering this case had run the same headline with the same one-word quote. Nope. Nanos had not held a press conference to deny the rumor. He had answered a reporter's question. One word. And then he had moved on. In 10 weeks of this case, Sheriff Nanos has not been a man of few words. He has spoken at multiple press conferences. He has given interviews to local Tucson outlets. He has responded to questions on his department's handling of the investigation, on his cooperation with the FBI, on his decision to use a Florida laboratory rather than the FBI's laboratory for certain evidence. In a local interview in late March, he defended the handling of the scene in pointed terms, saying he had no regrets about his team and their efforts, and that suggestions the crime scene had been released too soon were, in his word, silly. Nanos is not a quiet sheriff. He is a sheriff who has talked, and who, in talking, has produced some of the most controversial lines of the case. So a one-word answer from Chris Nanos is, in context, louder than it looks on the page. Nope is not an elaboration. It is the shortest possible closure of a rumor. And what makes it heavier, if you read it the way the case demands, is what it did not say. It did not say there had been a detention, but that no charges had followed. It did not say there had been an interview that stopped short of a detention. It did not describe a tip that had been investigated and discounted. It said, nope, which means, at least as the sheriff's office was willing to confirm on the record, there was nothing to investigate and discount in the first place. The next question is the one the community has been asking since the rumor collapsed. If there had been no detention, where had the tip come from? A tip that reaches a major broadcast is not necessarily a fabrication. It is also not necessarily accurate. The Friday tip could have been a misread of an unrelated law enforcement operation somewhere in southern Arizona. It could have been a tip from someone trying to generate a news cycle. It could have been a genuine lead that fell apart between the moment the tipster passed it on and the moment the broadcast went to air. None of those possibilities have been publicly resolved. What has been publicly resolved is that as of the sheriff's one-word answer on Friday, no new person of interest had been detained in the Nancy Guthrie case. The FBI has not announced a person of interest. The FBI has not announced an arrest. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not announced either. The hair sample remains in the hands of the FBI laboratory. The mixed DNA profile remains complex. The masked man on the doorbell camera remains unnamed. And Nancy Guthrie, on day 78 since her family reported her missing, remains missing. There is a reason the Friday rumor worked on the community as fast as it did. It worked because the community had watched this sequence play out before. Not once, twice. In the first 2 weeks of the case. Run the tape back to February 10th. On that Tuesday, the FBI released the first clear photos and the first piece of video from the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home. The photo showed a masked man at the front door in the early morning hours of February 1st, carrying a black backpack, moving in a way investigators said was consistent with someone tampering with the camera. The release was the first time the public had seen the man. Within hours, a second development broke. A man had been detained following a traffic stop south of Tucson. The Pima County Sheriff's Department posted on X that a subject was being questioned in connection with the investigation. CNN reported the individual had been detained near the border in a community called Rio Rico, approximately 60 miles south of Tucson. A property in Rio Rico was searched, and the community, which had been waiting at that point for 9 days for any indication the investigation had a person of interest, went through the same cycle it went through on Friday in April. Hopeful posts, speculation, feeds clogged with the same 3 letters, POI, knife, running in capitals over every repost. The detention ended the way the Friday rumor ended. The man was released after several hours. He identified himself to Telemundo, speaking in Spanish outside his home in Rio Rico, as Carlos Palazuelos. He said he was a delivery driver. He said he did not know who Nancy Guthrie was. He said he was not involved in any kidnapping. His mother-in-law, who had spoken to CNN the night before, said on air that her son-in-law had nothing to do with it. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed on February 11th that the adult male detained as part of follow-up on incoming leads had been released. No charges. No announcement that he had become a suspect. The search of the Rio Rico home concluded. The community closed the tab. Run the tape forward 3 days. On Friday the 13th of February, late at night, the Pima County Sheriff's Department posted on X that a law enforcement operation was underway at a residence in the Catalina foothills area, approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. This was not south of Tucson. This was close to the house itself. SWAT, Forensic Vehicles, FBI, Sahuarita Police Department, Oro Valley Police Department. A Shadow Hills resident told News 4 Tucson she had witnessed 3 people detained. A man and a woman detained at the house, a third person detained in a traffic stop a few miles away. FBI agents converged on the parking lot of a Culver's restaurant, where a gray Range Rover had been pulled in. The vehicle was photographed, searched, tarped, and towed. By morning, the story had the elements every large news operation amplifies. The SWAT operation. The detentions. The Range Rover towed from a family-friendly restaurant parking lot. The community leaned forward again, and again. Within hours, the story resolved in the now familiar direction. No arrest announced. None of the detained remained in custody in connection with the Guthrie case. Luke Daly was identified in the reporting as one of the people detained during the February 13th operation. His attorney, Chris Salepi, confirmed that his client had been the subject of 2 search warrants served that day, that Daly and his mother had both been detained while those warrants were executed at the home, and that both had been released without charges. Salepi disavowed any connection between Daly and the Guthrie case. Nobody stopped on the Rio Rico Road, at the Catalina Foothills home, or at the Culver's parking lot has been named as a suspect in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. That is the pattern. Detention, release. No charge, no named suspect, twice in the first 2 weeks. And on Friday in April, a variation on the 3rd attempt. A rumor that a 3rd detention had happened south of Tucson, killed inside 12 hours by a one-word denial from the sheriff. 3 rounds at the same rodeo. 3 times the community leaned forward. 3 times the community leaned back. And across all 3, the investigation's public scoreboard has not changed. No arrest. No named suspect. No confirmed motive. Nancy Guthrie still missing. When the Friday rumor collapsed, the conversation on X and on the aggregation sites shifted in a predictable way. The people who had posted finally, and please let this be it, moved within hours to the posts that have been running underneath this case for weeks. The inventory of what the community is actually holding. What the community is actually holding is a still unidentified man on a doorbell camera, described by the FBI, based on forensic analysis of the footage, as a male, average build, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, wearing a face mask, wearing gloves, carrying a 25-liter black Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack, a specific model Walmart sells nationwide. Described in subsequent reporting as having been observed, with what appeared to be a flashlight held in his mouth, freeing both hands to manipulate the area around the camera. Described by former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer in on-air analysis as someone whose movements on the camera suggest he may have been trying to open the door with his left hand while knocking with his right. Coffindaffer has floated a separate theory, which she has described plainly as a reach, that there may have been a second person inside the house at the moment the masked man was on the porch. She has not presented that as a conclusion. She has presented it as a possibility worth considering. What the community is actually holding is a cluster of DNA evidence that has not produced a named suspect. The glove DNA recovered approximately 2 miles from the home resolved to a restaurant worker with no connection to the case. The mixed DNA inside the home has defied the deconvolution tools the investigation has had at its disposal. The hair sample is in the hands of the FBI. It remains under analysis at the time of this broadcast. The genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, who works with Parabon Nanolabs and who has contributed to some of the highest-profile investigative genetic genealogy identifications in the United States over the last decade, has said publicly on NewsNation that DNA is hardy and that it is possible there is still DNA at the scene. She has pointed specifically to the flashlight in the mouth moment on the doorbell camera. Because saliva, if saliva was transferred to the camera housing, the shrub, or any nearby surface, is a category of biological evidence that crime scene investigators know how to swab. Moore has said the man's saliva is in her analysis, a likely place to find the profile the investigation needs. She has also acknowledged that in a house like Nancy Guthrie's, the question of where to start swabbing is hard. What the community is actually holding is a family that has not stopped asking. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Asterisk Today anchor desk on April 6th. She told viewers it was good to be back home, and wore a yellow dress that echoed the yellow flowers loved ones had placed at her mother's Catalina Foothills home. Savannah's siblings, Cameron Guthrie and Annie Guthrie, have been posting social media videos. The family announced on February 24th that they were offering a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Combined with the FBI's reward of up to $100,000, the total stands at $1.2 million. Savannah has clarified in a later Instagram post that the reward can be paid in cash. Anonymous tips are eligible. The family has left almost no procedural reason for a potential tipster to hold back. What the community is also holding is the Sheriff's Department's own procedural record on the case. The neighborhood canvassing. The request to residents within a 2-mile radius of the Catalina Foothills home to review any camera footage from January 1st through February 2nd for anything they considered unusual or significant. The multi-agency collaboration with the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and search and rescue teams. The confirmation that Nancy was dropped off at her home by her son-in-law the evening of January 31st, around 9:50 in the evening. That family members checked on her the following late morning when she did not appear for a planned live-stream church service with friends. The confirmation that her phone and her personal belongings were still inside the home when family arrived. The confirmation that blood on the front porch matched Nancy's. The description of Nancy as a vulnerable adult, due to her age, her mobility limitations, and her reliance on daily medication. The medication line has been one of the quiet pressures on the clock of this investigation from the beginning. And what the community is actually holding underneath all of it is the question the Friday rumor tried and failed to answer. Who is the man on the doorbell camera? Because until that question is answered, every south of Tucson detention, every hair sample, every board of supervisors vote, every one-word answer from a sheriff, is an event sitting on top of a case whose foundational mystery has not moved. Chris Nanos is not having a calm 78th day of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. And that pressure campaign is the context underneath the one-word answer he gave Michael Ruiz on Friday. Begin with the deputies. On March 24th of this year, the Pima County Deputies Organization, the PCDO, the union representing more than 300 rank-and-file deputies, passed a no-confidence vote against Sheriff Nanos. The vote was reported as 241 in favor of the option labeled "No Confidence and Resign," 65 abstentions, and 0 votes for the option labeled "Confidence and Continue." Not a single deputy who cast a non-abstention vote sided with the sheriff. The union called for his resignation. Aaron Cross, its president, has been quoted saying the citizens of Pima County should be aware their chief law enforcement officer is being, in his word, untruthful when giving sworn testimony. Cross's lawsuit against Nanos predates the Guthrie case. The deposition at the center of the current controversy was taken in December of 2025, before Nancy was abducted. That deposition is where the second pressure point begins. In March of this year, reporting by the Asterisk, Arizona Republic revealed discrepancies between Nanos's publicly posted resume, his 2025 deposition testimony, and the internal affairs records of the El Paso Police Department, where he began his law enforcement career. According to the Arizona Republic, corroborated by The Hollywood Reporter, Newsweek, and Shinabez Luminaria, Nanos's publicly posted resume listed a 1984 departure from the El Paso Police Department. Internal affairs records reportedly show a resignation in lieu of termination in August of 1982. 2 years earlier, the reported disciplinary history included 8 suspensions totaling 34 to 37 days, depending on the document, for incidents including a shot fired, off-duty gambling, habitual tardiness, insubordination, and excessive force. In his December 2025 deposition in the Cross lawsuit, Nanos was asked whether he had ever received discipline rising to the level of suspension. He answered, no, from mentions to manicestus. The El Paso records, as reported, indicate 8 suspensions. The Sheriff's Department, through a spokesperson, attributed the publicly posted resume's dates to what it called clerical errors. Nanos himself has defended his career record in broad terms, pointing to more than 4 decades of service and characterizing his tenure as one rooted in public accountability and the protection of residents. The Board of Supervisors did not treat the Arizona Republic reporting as a closed conversation. At a meeting on March 24, the board directed its legal counsel to draft language requiring Nanos to provide reports under oath. On April 7, the board voted unanimously to invoke Arizona Revised Statute 11-253, a territorial-era state law that allows the board to compel sworn testimony from a county employee. The questions cover his prior representations about his El Paso employment, any prior disciplinary history, disciplinary actions involving his former political opponent, and former Pima County Jail Lieutenant Heather LePenu, his department's coordination with federal immigration officials, and the department's budget overruns. Matt Hines, vice chair of the Pima County Board of Supervisors, has been quoted by Arizona Public Media, saying Nanos must provide a substantive response. Beyond the board, there is the recall effort. Daniel Gutierrez, a Republican congressional candidate, launched the formal recall process in March. He told Arizona Public Media that Nanos's handling of the Nancy Guthrie case was, in his words, names a big embarrassment to the community, and that the reporting on Nanos's work history compelled him to start the campaign. The recall effort is, by the reporting, a long shot. Procedural barriers in Arizona are high. But it is active. Beyond the recall, there is the 2024 election context. Nanos won re-election in 2024 by a narrow margin, placed by reporting at fewer than 500 votes. His opponent, Heather LePenu, was reportedly suspended from her position weeks before voters went to the polls. A subsequent independent review has reportedly confirmed that Nanos used department resources for political gain during that election, a finding that has fed into the broader pattern of institutional concern the board is now examining. Underneath all of it is a federal lawsuit filed by LePenu, which, as the reporting frames it, is a separate and parallel legal pressure on Nanos that does not resolve if he resigns or is removed. And underneath that, an American Civil Liberties Union lawsuit alleging coordination between deputies and Border Patrol, an additional item in the Sheriff's Department's pending litigation docket. None of that has been adjudicated. None of the Arizona Republic reporting has been proven in a criminal court. The deposition question about suspensions is the subject of a perjury review. The Board of Supervisors has reportedly pushed the Arizona Attorney General to consider referring to the Department of Justice. Nanos has disputed the characterization of his record. The Sheriff's Department has defended its handling of the Guthrie investigation in multiple public statements. There is a word investigators and defense lawyers use when they talk about evidence. Silence. Silence is not nothing. Silence is a category. What a witness does not say. What a document does not contain. What an agency declines to confirm. These are shapes in the record. And the shapes carry meaning. A one-word answer from a sheriff to a major market reporter about a nationally covered investigation is a shape. And what the shape contains when you trace it is information the audience does not immediately see. A sheriff who had detained a person of interest in a high-profile case would, in almost every instance, not answer a reporter's question with the single word, nope. He would either decline to comment citing the investigation, or he would confirm the detention in limited terms consistent with departmental guidance. Nope is not a no comment. Nope is a denial. A sheriff who had not detained a person of interest, but who had an active lead in that direction, an interview scheduled, a search warrant pending, an identified individual whose whereabouts were being tracked, would also, in almost every instance, not answer. He might decline. He might say the investigation remains active. He would not, as a matter of institutional prudence, close the door on a question about detention if the detention was being actively prepared. Nope is the shape of a door closed all the way. A sheriff, who knows there is no lead in that direction at all, whose investigation has not produced a detainable person in the 76 days since the abduction, can answer, nope, without risk. Nope is low cost. Nope is accurate if the answer is literally no, and for an audience watching closely, nope is intentionally or not, an admission that the case is exactly where the public evidence says it is, not where the audience wishes it were. That is why the asterisk nope has lived in the news cycle longer than the underlying rumor. The rumor was in the cycle for less than a day. The nope has been in the cycle for the entire weekend. The nope is the sentence every aggregator headlined. It is the sentence that, 20 years from now, if this case resolves, will sit in the timeline of the investigation as the one-word marker of the Friday in April when the community briefly thought and was wrong. This is not the sheriff's fault. He did not manufacture the rumor. He did not script the Wednesday mid-show handoff on Asterix Today. He did not send the tip to the Asterix Crime Stories broadcast. What he did was answer a question. The answer closed a hopeful narrative the community had built in the absence of institutional transparency. And the closure of that narrative is, for a case that has now run 78 days, a quiet but heavy thing. Because every closure of a false narrative is a narrowing. And every narrowing is an implicit admission that the true narrative, whatever it turns out to be, has not yet been produced in public. The next 48 to 72 hours after this broadcast will not, on any realistic reading of the case, produce an arrest. The FBI laboratory does not announce hair sample results in the same week a sample arrives. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is scheduled to meet on April 21st. That meeting will publicly surface, in whatever form Nanos chooses to provide it, his response to the 4 questions the board sent after its April 7th vote. The response will set the tone for the next phase of institutional pressure on the sheriff's office. Whether the board accepts it as substantive, whether it moves toward additional action under Arizona Revised Statute 11-253, and whether the recall campaign picks up or slows based on what the response contains. Under that institutional story, the investigative story continues. The FBI's analysis of the hair sample is ongoing. The mixed DNA from inside the home remains the obstacle the investigation has been asked to solve. Investigative genetic genealogy, the technique that produced the identification of the Golden State Killer and has contributed to identifications in a growing catalog of cold cases, requires a clean enough profile to build a genealogical tree. C.C. Moore's comments point to what every forensic analyst watching this case has been pointing to from the start. If there is saliva, if there is an extractable profile, if the FBI laboratory can do what the Florida laboratory could not, then the profile goes up against the genealogical databases, and the man on the doorbell camera has a name. Until then, the community does the thing the community has been doing for 78 days. It watches. It waits. It reads the credible reporting. It resists the tips that do not come with attribution. It holds its temperature steady through the Friday rumors and the one-word answers. If you have been following this case with care, and you want the next piece the moment it appears, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, and if today's breakdown was useful to you, drop a comment below, even if it's just where you are in this case and what you believe is still missing. The next development may be a court filing. It may be an FBI press release. It may be a Pima County Board of Supervisors vote. It may be a one-word answer that looks in context as heavy as this one did. And when it arrives, the coverage here will continue, with the same attention to attribution, the same respect for the living, and the same commitment to the case this audience has been waiting to see solved. Anyone with information on the whereabouts of Nancy Guthrie is urged to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward for information leading to her recovery is up to $1.2 million. Tips can be anonymous. The reward can be paid in cash.